Welcome everyone to the March installment of the IPM Hour. It is almost a year since we started on this format of presenting research and extension work in the West, and actually more broadly than that now. But um, so I think it's been pretty successful. I think we've had fun. I know Steve has had fun. He's always smiling anyway. Um, so today we have a lineup of three speakers. The first speaker today is going to be Qiting, who is from Alberta, Canada. Qiting graduated with a degree in environmental sciences from the University of Alberta, and she is currently the Integrated Pest Management Program Coordinator for the City of Edmonton, and oversees the public education and social marketing campaign to raise awareness about invasive plants. Qiting sits on the board of directors in the Alberta Invasive Species Council, and there she represents, and this board represents major municipalities in the province. And today, she's going to talk about her efforts in the Spot It, Report It, Remove It campaign. Go ahead and take it away, Qiting.
Thank you for the introduction. Just bear with me here when I figure out screen sharing. Is this showing up?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. So thank you, everyone. My name is Qiting, and I feel honored to have the opportunity to speak to you today from Canada about a pilot that we ran back in 2019 called Spot It, Report It, Remove It. And it aims at mobilizing residents in the fight against invasive weeds. For those of you who don't know about Edmonton, where I'm right now, it is this huge dot on the map, and we are the capital city of Alberta, a province that's border with Montana on the south side, and our city has close to 1 million population. A little bit of backgrounds. The key driver behind our Spot It, Report It, Remove It campaign, it's a piece of legislation called the Alberta We Control Act. It legislates 75 existing or high-risk invasive plants into two categories. So one is prohibited noxious weeds, which means the entire plant, including all the reproductive parts, has to be destroyed. And for the second category, noxious weeds, property owners are required to control the spread of them, but not elimination. So most of the time, noxious weeds are already here and they're widespread, and to destroy them would require an incredible amount of resources. And on the picture in the lower right is an example of a local infestation of a noxious weed called field scabious in a dog park. So I'm not sure if any of you online have ever tried to close a dog park to do chemical treatment of weeds, but I can tell you it's not easy. So the Alberta We Control Act also grants power to our weed inspectors to do site visits and issue tickets to property owners who are not in compliance. So far, 35 out of the 75 regulated weeds have been detected in Edmonton, and it is a lot of weeds that we need to manage, but we only have limited resources. We also have lots of green spaces. Here's a map that shows all the parks in the different color polygons. So the purple ring row is a utility line, but all the other color polygons would indicate a city park. And we have the North Saskatchewan River Valley, which runs through the city, and it's about 18,000 acres. It is the largest urban park in Canada. And on average, Edmonton has 17 acres of parkland per 1,000 population. But we have limited resources to manage the huge parkland space that we have, as well as the million population. For example, in 2020, there are only 6 weed inspectors in the entire municipality. So we know that we cannot do it all, and we have to get residents to understand and be on our side to manage regulated weeds and protect our ecosystem. So the next step is to persuade management to allocate resources for a public social marketing campaign. And this is my pitch. So in the world of invasive species management, there's a principle called the early detection rapid response, EDRR. And every invasive species follow this invasion curve showcased on the graph. And which would grow exponentially if there's no intervention. And invasive species would go from not present on the left side to the introduction stage, where the population size is relatively small. And we call this the EDRR stage. And the public plays an important role in monitoring the surrounding environment and detecting new species. And there are many examples around the world that new invasive species were not detected by scientists or people like us who are out there looking for them, but by the public who use their neighborhood parks every day. So we know that the earlier we can detect a new invasion, the better. So as you can see on the right side of the graph, once a population had gone past the EDR stage, management efficiency would go down and costs would increase. So it is to our best interest to spend limited resources we have on species that's still in the EDR stage. And that's how we launch the Spot It, Report It, Remove It campaign. And more background. So we have done campaign to raise awareness about regulated weeds. And these are materials from 2014. But as you can see, the narrative is quite enforcement focused. We are calling weeds the public enemy. And the information postcard on the right, it's packed with information. For example, there are pictures of 10 species that we want people to know about. And you will notice changes that we made when I show you the newer materials that we created for Spot It, Report It, Remove It. So it is a social marketing campaign, which is one step further than an awareness campaign. Our goal is not simply to raise awareness about invasive plants and the reason why we should control them, but we also look for changes in behaviors. For example, we ask residents to be on the lookout for specific weeds. So monitoring is the first call to action. And we also ask residents to report regulated weeds or send in a weed identification request if they have questions. Last but not least, we also ask residents to control regulated weeds on their property if after spotting them on their private lawn. So because it was a pilot in 2019, we have tried on different tactics for community outreach, which I will talk about later in the presentation. We have also done some surveys to gauge the current knowledge level of our residents on invasive weeds. Moving on, the 3 target species in the campaign. And I think this is a good place to mention that I didn't create this whole thing on my own. We have a communications team to support the campaign. And I work with an in-house social marketing specialist to decide on what we're gonna do and which species to focus on. And the first thing she told me is to focus on no more than 3 species. And she had good reasons. As you have seen, earlier from our old postcard from 2014, there were 10 species and lots of other information pack on a tiny postcard. And apparently it's a big no, simply because of the short attention spans of us as humans, especially nowadays. So it's better to convey good messaging on the free targets than having people toss out the postcard because they may feel overwhelmed. So in our outreach events, we talk to residents about first one, creeping bellflower on the left. This is very common in our older neighborhoods, and it's a great conversation starter. People would actually see our banner and walk up to us and say, hey, I have this in my lawn. So we target this species and ask our residents to remove it. And Himalayan balsam and garlic mustard are both EDRR species in Edmonton. They're only found in certain areas, and we ask residents to spot it and report it. So here are a couple examples of communication tactics that we use. First of all, we went to community events that have audience with vested interest in plants, gardening, or environmental conservation. For example, we talked to over 100 attendees at Edmonton City Sunday, which is a huge event for local gardeners every year. We also have pop-up booths at different venues, including local greenhouses, recreation centers, and community hubs. And this picture on the right shows you the setup that we would have. So huge banners with the pictures of the species, and we would normally use an engagement wheel to attract people. I would say this is the best thing you could have for any engagement events. It's a great success, and I highly recommend it. And what we have done is we have pictures of our target species on the slots, and we would talk to residents about whatever species they land on, and then further explain what the campaign is about. We will also hand out information postcards for them to bring home if they're interested. And we have gardening gloves with spot it, report it, remove it printed on the back as giveaway as well. And the third tactic we have tried is door-to-door campaign in pilot neighborhoods, where our engagement staff would go door knocking and invite residents to participate in the spot it, report it, remove it campaign by doing one or more of the actions. The way we measure campaign success is by the number of interactions. So an interaction means a meaningful conversation with the resident about regulated weeds and the campaign. For example, handing out a postcard to someone who walked by doesn't count as an interaction. Like, it has to be a conversation between the residents and our staff, and detailed information would be provided. So in summary, we have close to 1,500 interactions during the pilot in 2019. And as I mentioned before, because this was a pilot, we want to gauge the knowledge level of residents about invasive weeds. So the 386 households who we talked to in the door-to-door campaign are the audience of an pre and post campaign survey. So we asked their knowledge level of invasive weeds and whether they would be willing to participate in the campaign. So from the first survey, so this was done when we knock on their door to have the initial conversation in June. 72% residents indicate that they have some knowledge of invasive weeds, and 92% agree to participate in the campaign by taking one or more actions. And 74% accepted a pair of gardening gloves, which is shown in the picture on the right, We call this a prompter. So the hope is when people pick up or see the gloves, it would remind them to spot it, report it, remove it. And we also emailed the 386 households at the end of the summer. I believe it's August, for a post-campaign survey, and about half of them replied to the survey. Out of the half who replied, 85% of people said they have removed invasive weeds from their property, which is great. And about 60% said the gardening gloves did remind them to participate in the campaign. We also have data on 81% of them said they find the information postcard useful. So on the screen here, it's the two sides of the card that we produced in 2019. And as you will notice, compared to the version from 2014, we really try to trim down on contents and utilize visuals and focus on the free targets that we have. And we are quite happy that the majority of people are finding them useful. So that kind of concludes our in-person outreach event. And moving on, I would like to show you the other tactic that we have tried on Japanese knotweed. So we created a postcard solely for Japanese knotweed because it's an emerging concern because we are finding more and more of them on private properties in Edmonton. And for those of you who are not familiar, Japanese knotweed is one of the worst invasive plants because they have the ability to grow through cracks in concrete and damage foundations and infrastructure. And I'm going to play an audio, which is a radio ad that we air in the summer of 2019. And I'm going to mute myself to avoid feedback.
Japanese knotweed is one of the world's top 100 invasive species and has been found in Edmonton. But don't let its heart-shaped leaves and beautiful flowers fool you. Its vigorous root growth can damage concrete walls, pavement, home foundations, as well as drainage works. Spot it, report it, remove it. If you suspect you found Japanese knotweed on private or public property, use the Edmonton 311 app to report it. Then go to edmonton.ca/weeds for information on how to remove it. This message brought to you by the City of Edmonton.
So that's what we tried, and I will show you some data at the end in terms of how effective we think it is. Moving on to another tactic we use to facilitate the reported action is the Edmonton 311 app, as you hear from the radio ad. So the 311 app is basically for residents to report anything to the city. So it can be like a traffic light that's not working, or a tree that came down, or other concerns. It's everything in one app. So we developed a whole new weeds category shown on the left side. I manage the weed information, weed identification feature. And the picture on the right is an example of how you use it. People can just take a picture of the plant that they have questions about and send it to us. And we'll get back to them with what it is and whether it's a regulated weed or require any control actions. And the other three categories you see under weeds are ways to make complaints, and they will be directed to the appropriate teams. So here's an example of a picture that we received. Does anyone online want to type in the chat about what they think this monster is? You have 30 seconds and I'll take a water break. So I cannot see your answers, but Steve, did anybody get it?
We have a couple, well, one says, I don't think we have that in Arizona, but a couple of people said lettuce going to flower or prickly lettuce. So yeah, we've got some answers.
Awesome. So you're right, this is a bolted lettuce. So I would say the weed identification is the most interesting and fun part of the job for me and my summer student, because you never know what people are gonna setting. And we are quite encouraged by the amount of people who were using this feature. So on average, we would get a couple hundred inquiries over summer. Thanks for everybody who put in their answers. Okay. I don't know how to get rid of the top.
We'll ignore it.
Okay, I'll keep going. My next favorite thing in the campaign is our community weed poll events. So I know that we focus on asking people to remove regulated weeds from their private properties, but we also engage residents in volunteer events to pull weeds in our beautiful river valley. So there's a long history of the program, which started back in 2011. And for the year of 2019 alone, we have 82 volunteers who join us in 4 events. And the picture on the right shows you the awesome volunteers that we have from one of the events in 2019. We also try to do a better job at telling our stories. So this map on the left is what I made based on monitoring efforts that we have in Canada Ravine in Edmonton. We utilize volunteers to hand pull Himalayan balsam, a prohibited noxious weed, for 3 consecutive years. And for those of you who don't know Himalayan balsam, it's a perfect candidate for weed pull events because it's quite easy to identify, and it has really shallow root system that can be easily pulled out. And it only reproduces by seeds. So once you pull them out, you can safely tell your volunteers that it's gone. Because it's also very important for participants to know that they are making a difference. So by 2019, the map at the bottom, Himalayan balsam population in the ravine it's well under control. And we actually made a poster for conferences for this, and we were ready to present, but of course it didn't happen in 2020. I still hope that we will be able to utilize it in some way in the future. No, it's not going away. And I would like to move on to our digital/web presence. We put a lot of efforts in building a website for the public with information about regulated weeds. And we have over 126K views in 2019 alone. We also utilize social media to the best we can. So here's an example of a Facebook event for the community weed poll. And on the right side is an Instagram story that's interactive, like people can put in their answers. And we also started an IPM newsletter, and it's a collaboration by all the teams who practice IPM in the city. So it's not only weeds, but there would be topics around aquatic invasives, tree pests, urban wildlife, you name it. And we have also utilized the media when we first launched Spot It, Report It, Remove It, and just use the news channels to spread the word out. And I promise this is the last data slide that I have. So in Edmonton, we have something called Inside Community. And it's a group of people who subscribe to monthly surveys that the city puts out, and they're all members of the public. So I've used a survey on this platform to ask people if they have heard about the campaign and how did they hear about it. So as you can see from the results, social media and local news are the main ways to get messages to people. And there's a limited number of people who heard our radio ads or attended our outreach events. So in summary, I have a few key learnings that I would like to share with you today. We conclude that face-to-face interaction yield the best results, mostly because invasive species could be an intimidating topic to people. And when we have the chance to have a conversation with residents and give them the chance to ask any question that they may have, it's much better than the one-way communication when we try to pour information on them. And again, picture on the left is one of events where the engagement wheel was well used. We have also concluded, based on the survey from the last slide, media events and social media are very effective ways to reach people. It may be a little bit challenging if you're not used to having multiple cameras pointing at you, and that's the tiny me in the middle on the picture on the right. But I would say it's worth the effort because news channels can really get your words far and wide. Last but not least, for the topic of invasive species, we feel like using visuals and storytelling are effective. And if I were to do it again, maybe instead of the radio ad about Japanese knotweed, it may be better to do a printed ad or something visual to get the message across. And we hope to improve our storytelling about how people have been engaged in the Spotted Reported Remove It campaign. In terms of the future, we were actually planning to continue the pilot in 2020, but it did not happen because in-person events were not possible. So right now, with the new fiscal environment, we may not be able to run the campaign to the full extent as it was in 2019, but we will continue to engage our audience by using social media, volunteer events, and other low-cost tactics. So that's my experience. Any questions?
Great, thanks, Qiting. Are there any questions for Qiting? If not, I do have a question.
Yeah, Matt,
Sure.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jim.
When residents report a weed, an invasive weed, then what happens to that report?
So it depends on which channel they go through. If they select the weed identification, basically we'll just let them know what it is and whether they need to be controlled. And if it's a complaint that's coming, and again, there are two streams. If it's private property, it's likely to be diverted to our weed inspectors, and they can do the investigation and site visits and education. And if it's on public property, it will also be directed to our operational teams to see if they have the resources to do the control.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering because if they report it and then remove it, it wouldn't be there, right?
Right. So if it's public property, we don't really anticipate them to remove it unless it's like an organized weed pull. But for private property, we really try to help people identify what's there and let them know what would be the best practices, whether it's like pulling it, digging it, trying to help the best we can.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question was very similar to that. Although I did have one follow-up. Are any of these weeds, are they under a regulated status where reporting is required to more than just the city?
Not really. The Alberta We Control Act doesn't have a reporting requirement. For example, up to the province, no.
Mhm. Okay, thanks. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think we can move on to our next set of speakers. Thanks again, Qiting. That
Thank
was
you.
great.
Very much.
So next up, we have two folks from USDA's Office of Pest Management and Policy. Julie Chao is a regulatory risk assessor focusing primarily on human health risk assessments. She previously worked as a senior advisor on international pesticide regulatory policy and trade at USDA's Foreign Ag Service and also at EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs, otherwise known as OPP, as a risk manager. She received a master's degree in international affairs and a master's of science in public health, which I actually had to look up that acronym. I didn't know what MSPH was, in international nutrition, both from Johns Hopkins. And she is an alumnus of the University of California, Santa Cruz, earning degrees. I think this is either both 2 degrees or maybe a degree and a minor, I'm not sure, in environmental science and sociology. And then Dr. Clayton Myers is a senior entomologist also at USDA OPMP, focusing on regulatory issues related to insecticides and insecticide resistance management and crop protection tools for hemp. Prior to joining OPMP, Clayton worked at EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs for nearly a decade, where he has extensive experience in pesticide benefit usage analysis, label review, and insecticide efficacy review. Clayton did his PhD at Penn State and worked as a postdoctoral researcher with USDA ARS at the Appalachian Fruit Research Station in Kearneyville in West by God, Virginia. So go ahead. I think, Julie, you're up first.
All right, thanks so much, Matt. And I'm going to turn off my video while I'm presenting just to preserve a little bit of bandwidth. So bear with me as I share my screen. Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting both me and Clayton to join you today. As Matt said, my name is Julie Chao, and I work as a regulatory risk assessor with USDA's Office of Pest Management Policy. I've been with the office for just over a year, but I've actually been working with federal and international pesticide policy for about 17 years now. So Clayton and I both really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you, to introduce our office, and talk about some of the potential opportunities for collaborating. I'm going to go through a couple of slides that cover our office's main functions, briefly go over the federal pesticide regulatory process, in particular how our office engages with that. And then we'll end hopefully with some discussion on how you can get involved in that process. And since I'm doing the presentation, I'm going to let Clayton answer most of the tough questions. So just to introduce you to our office, OPMP is currently housed in USDA's Office of the Chief Economist. Some of our primary responsibilities include developing department level policy on pest management, pesticides, and agricultural biotechnology. We also consult with stakeholders on pest management related actions that are being taken by USDA or under consideration by USDA and other agencies. And we also coordinate with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, and other federal and state regulatory agencies around emerging pest management issues or scientific and policy issues that are of concern to agricultural stakeholders. There's a little bit more information about our office at the link that I've provided at the bottom of the slide, but just to give you some historical context, our office was actually created in 1998 as a direct response to grower concerns about implementation of the Food Quality Protection Act. That act passed in 1996, and among many things, it introduced a number of additional safety standards and regulatory requirements for pesticides. Fortunately, at the time, stakeholders and the government both realized that in order to actually implement those new requirements, regulators would need to develop new methods and incorporate usage and monitoring data to really refine pesticide risk assessments in a way that would better reflect real world conditions. So our office, OPMP, was largely set up to facilitate that, and today we continue to ensure that our fellow federal agencies are receiving the best available data and accurate information so they can really base regulatory decisions on current and realistic agricultural practices. OPMP is an interdisciplinary team. It includes our director. We have 3 biologists, 2 risk assessors, an economist, a biotechnology advisor, and an administrative officer. And all of our work requires a lot of collaboration with each other, but also with stakeholders. So everyone in our office is always happy to hear from any of you anytime. And if you'd like to get in touch or learn more about the responsibilities that members of our team cover, there's a link at the bottom of this screen where you can find that information. So as much as we do our best to keep up with, sort of emerging issues and developments in pest management through surveys or published research or webinars or even Twitter, the reality is that we're not in the field. Our offices are based in Washington, D.C. So a really important part of our job is connecting with people like you who really have direct knowledge about current practices and evolving issues on the ground. And to that end, we do quite a bit of outreach with a broad range of stakeholders. And I've already seen some names on this call, and I know you've received emails from our office. But we outreach with growers and commodity associations, with pesticide users and applicators, also with pesticide manufacturers. We also do work with other federal and state agencies. Out west, a lot of your state lead agencies have really terrific information sources and databases for pesticide usage or monitoring data. And we also work a lot with universities and extension agents and pest control advisors. And all that information that we receive from stakeholders gets summarized, synthesized, and supplemented and provided to our federal partners like the Environmental Protection Agency to help inform their regulatory process. At times, our office is also responsible for providing data and other factual information to support congressional activities, and we also participate in the activities of various international organizations to represent U.S. agricultural interests. So that was sort of a high-level overview of why OPMP exists, who we are, and who we work with. But now I'll try to get a little bit more into detail about how we work through a lens of pesticide regulation. As I'm sure all of you are aware, the Environmental Protection Agency is the primary agency responsible for federal pesticide regulation in the United States. Among its many responsibilities, EPA evaluates the potential for pesticides to harm humans and the environment. EPA also approves pesticide labels that direct users on how to use pesticides in ways that not only reduce risk, but also ensure that the pesticides are efficacious. And EPA also conducts periodic reevaluation of all pesticide registrations every 15 years. And that was actually one of the requirements of the Food Quality Protection Act that I mentioned earlier. In addition to these things, EPA would also be responsible for things like setting tolerances or legal limits for pesticide residues in food. And they would also do rulemaking on various aspects of worker safety. And through regional offices in cooperation with states, EPA would also carry out enforcement activities. I wanted to say up front that USDA is very strongly supportive of all these efforts, and also wanted to highlight some of the important strengths of the US regulatory framework as we see them. First, the US system is grounded in science, and decisions are based on a full assessment of risk, not just hazard. There's also a very strong recognition and consideration of benefits in the US system. And there are also provisions for transparency and public participation with almost every major decision that's under consideration. So this system has really provided US growers with, I think, one of the most robust pest management toolboxes in the world. And at OPMP, even though we'd always like to see that toolbox be a little bit bigger and fuller, in general, we do think that this system works really well for the diverse interests of the American public. So at OPMP, our role in this process is really to provide agricultural context and usage information in order to assist EPA with their regulatory process. And sometimes we refer to this as characterizing agricultural use. And there are a couple ways that we do this. We often start by examining the inputs that EPA uses to assess risk. EPA will often look at maximum label allowances or sort of a worst case scenario, but we also seek to provide information to them on typical usage. So for example, we would look at how a pesticide is really being used, what kind of application methods or timing are in place, where is it being applied, what percentage of a crop might be treated with a particular pesticide. And we also look at how existing label use directions and restrictions already exist that mitigate some risks. And of course, we always aim to provide data and other supporting information around this kind of characterization. We also try to help EPA assess the potential impacts of any proposed label changes, or even determine whether or not a mitigation measure that they're considering would be feasible to implement. So in some cases, a proposed change may not be a use cancellation, but if it's so expensive or onerous to implement, it may serve as a de facto cancellation. Um, we recognize that growers and pesticide users and pest control advisors are often in the best position to inform whether or not a change under consideration is actually going to be workable. And in a lot of cases, we've seen that stakeholders can offer the best insights into alternative options that would actually allow EPA to achieve the same level of risk reduction, but in a manner that's going to be less burdensome or costly to the user. And finally, we also provide information about the benefits of pesticides to agriculture. So for example, we may be able to point out whether there would be few or no alternative methods to control a specific pest. Or in other cases, maybe the available pest management alternatives actually pose higher risks than the pesticide that's under consideration. And we also always try to emphasize the role that a pesticide or a mode of action may play in integrated pest management or resistant management programs. There are a number of points in the process where EPA provides opportunity to comment on its proposed actions and decisions. As part of its reevaluation process of looking at pesticides every 15 years, EPA will usually publish its draft ecological and human health risk assessments for the public to look at. They also publish draft preliminary interim decisions. And so the people have an opportunity to look at the types of changes or mitigation measures that are under consideration. EPA also provides the public with an opportunity to comment on all new pesticide active ingredients or new uses. And they also have public comment for other types of rulemaking and policy proposals. For example, worker protection regulations or changes to data requirements to demonstrate the efficacy of different products. So OPMP routinely provides information to EPA via this public comment process. And the nice thing about it is that anyone can view the information that we or other individuals and organizations submit to EPA through that process. It's very transparent. So the public comments are typically made through the regulations.gov platform. This is a website. Anyone can provide public comments during an open comment period. I really like this tagline that they have on the website. It says, make a difference, submit your comments and let your voice be heard. I can tell you as a former regulator, and I think Clayton would agree too, that the comments that get submitted are very important and everyone gets looked at. I think regulators take these very seriously because they do want to know that the changes they're proposing or the actions they're taking are actually going to be workable, because if they're not workable, you're unlikely to achieve the overall objective. So I do encourage you to participate. Now, even though I just said that all comments are looked at and valued, the reality is that not every comment leads to the change that the submitter might like to see. So in order for the comments to provide value, they do have to be substantive. And what does that mean to have a substantive comment? Well, I think it means that the content of the comment should be raising a scientific, legal, or technical issue that's relevant to the proposed action. There are a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can cite specific examples or published literature or data. You can even talk about your personal experience using the pesticide in question. It's very helpful if you describe how the action would actually impact you, your business, or your organization, or other constituents that you work with. In some cases, I think EPA, they do some impact analysis too, and they're already aware when something that they're proposing may have adverse impacts. So in some cases, they will either pose specific questions in their public documentation, or they will reach out directly to USDA with a list of questions seeking targeted input. So in those cases, being able to provide information in response to those targeted questions is particularly useful and important. And as I said, I think several of you on this call have received some of those lists of questions from us. And I will say that responding to all those questions and writing comments, we recognize that it takes a lot of time. It can be a full-time job. It, in fact, is pretty much my full-time job. And so we would encourage you to send comments to us if you're not able to submit them yourself. Any input that you can provide is very useful. As I mentioned, we take the information we gather from many different stakeholders and we summarize it, we synthesize it, and we try to supplement it. So we're always happy to work with you. Any piece of input you have is really helpful to the process. And I also just wanted to mention that right now OPMP is working with the IPM Center leadership, and we intend to send out a summary of draft documents or decisions that EPA has published shortly after they're released. We call this our triage process, but basically we look at all of the decisions that are open for comment and we try to summarize what some of the key impacts may be. And EPA just released a batch of draft risk assessments, and we're expecting to see some preliminary interim decisions soon as well. So please stay posted. And with that, I just want to leave you with a few additional links, links to more information on our office, as well as information about the pesticide regulatory process. Also, regulations.gov just underwent a sort of revamp, and our office has had some issues using it, and we've been in contact with their help team quite a bit, and they are very helpful. So if you're having trouble submitting your comments, I definitely recommend that you reach out to their help team. And that's it. And I'm looking forward to discussing and answering questions.
Great. Thanks, Julie. That was really terrific. I'm not seeing any questions yet in the chat.
Well, while you guys are formulating your questions, I just want to give a shout out to our former USDA colleague, Dr. Jill Schroeder, who I see on the call. She used to work in OPMP, so she might not have a question, but she may also have some great insights.
Oh, so Emily has her hand up. Emily, you want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, hi. It's not exactly a question, but my name's Emily Zakowski, and I work at CDFA, actually in an office with California Department of Food and Agriculture. Um, and I work in an office that's very similar to the one your office. It's called the Office of Pesticide Consultation and Analysis. So I kind of just wanted to see if, you guys were familiar with the office and if yeah, pretty much that's it. And maybe we could connect at some point and kind of, see if there are opportunities there.
Thanks. I appreciate you saying that. I was actually not familiar with your specific office within CDFA. Um, it would be a helpful connection for sure, because there are a lot of times where we are concerned about regulations at the state level, and that's not really our office's primary wheelhouse in terms of state comments. We really focus on federal agencies. We did submit comments in support of neonicotinoid insecticides. That was one of the first state level interactions we've had, and we of course recognize that the state of California doesn't have to care what we think about that, but we did want to be on record in support of a lot of the critical grower needs there. So I appreciate you highlighting that, and yeah, I'd love to connect. I think that'd be good.
Awesome.
Ditto.
Thanks. Great.
Hi, this is Roger McGarry. I'm based here in Raleigh. I've just started as a co-director at the Southern Region Center for IPM. And one of our responsibilities is to manage and help produce pest management strategic plans and crop profiles, which I understand are used for regulatory decision making. And Robin Bodwin is also on the call. She helps actually manage the IPM database. But we actually had a question for you guys if you're using crop profiles and these plans, how they're being used, and how we can help you in your job by producing these.
Thanks, Roger. I love PMSPs and crop profiles. Our offices use them all the time. It can really save a lot of outreach effort if we have good summaries of benefits information and sort of current estimates of topics and sort of what are the most critical needs. The PMSPs tend to do a wonderful job of that sort of summary, especially different times of the season at different crop stages, different pests. And so, those are tremendously helpful. And my only wish is that more of them could be updated more frequently. But I know that's expensive, and I know there's a prioritization process behind that. Certainly, also before I came to this job, when I worked in OPP, I also made use of those documents very frequently because EPA appreciates those, not just for the variety of information, but it's real credibility. Like the teams that are pulled together to work on those are the real experts. And so it's a lot more useful for them sometimes than just sort of an anecdotal report or a one-off kind of comment from someone in some field somewhere. So yeah, tremendously valuable. And to the extent that those could be updated, we really appreciate it.
That's really great to hear. And I know we'll be having some discussions about how we can update more of those and get those that happening. But yeah, thanks for that feedback. It's really helpful.
Yeah.
One.
Oh, sorry, Julie. Go ahead.
No, Clayton, please finish.
The only other thing I would add to that is the ones that I think are especially beneficial are for the really minor crops and small sector sorts of niche crops where we often don't have good pesticide usage data. We do have access to commercial market research data for pesticide usage for, the big acreage crops and even the larger acreage specialty crops like pome fruits and caneberries and strawberries and things like that. But a lot of some of the crops that are not included in include things like mint and hops. Sweet potatoes is actually not surveyed, even though we think it should be. Blueberries are not surveyed. So, for crops where we don't have that good usage data, the PMSPs are even that much more valuable.
That's good feedback. Yeah, I didn't realize that. I would have thought we should prioritize the big crops. So that's great feedback.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add is that we've had some discussions in our office about how we can better communicate back to you when we've used those resources and when they've really made an impact in the regulatory process. Not only because it's great to feel good about the work getting done, but also just to support more resources for doing more of those. So we hope to find better ways to communicate some of those success stories back to you.
Okay, yeah, that's excellent. And I can follow up with you guys after the call, and maybe we can set up a time to talk. We'd love to talk. Thank you.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. So I think that's it. Thanks, Julie and Clayton for a wonderful presentation. That was really, really terrific. Thank you all again for joining the March edition of the IPM Hour. We will have, let's see. Okay, yeah. So we will have the next IPM Hour will be April 14th, middle of the month. And Steve has I think he has the speakers already lined up for the 14th.
We do indeed. Greg Montez from Cetera is going to be talking about the use of mating disruption in IPM programs. And Brett Warnke from Oregon is going to talk about some of their work with smart sprayer technology. It's quite interesting.
Terrific. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.